When my stepfather's hand struck my face, the first sound I heard was my sister's laugh. She pays. We smile. She chirped, raising her wine glass in a mock toast. I stumbled back, my hand clutching my phone, my own blood smearing the screen. My head was ringing, but through the chaos, I saw the red dot flashing on the display. It was recording automatically, saving every single second of my humiliation to the cloud. My name is Claire Nolan, and I am 34 years old. For most of my life, I've considered myself a diplomat, a negotiator of domestic treaties, a human air conditioner set to a constant, comfortable 72 degrees. My primary function, especially during the mandatory Sunday dinners, was to absorb the oppressive heat generated by my family and circulate something neutral, something breathable, in its place. Tonight, the system was failing. The setting was, as always, Thomas's stage. His house in the manicured suburbs of Lexington, Massachusetts, was a monument to his success, a sprawling colonial with more rooms than people, each one decorated with a cold, impersonal precision that spoke of an interior designer, not a home. The dining room was the heart of this sterile palace, dominated by a mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the crystalline glare of the chandelier above. It was a light that didn't warm. It interrogated. It glinted off the silver, caught the deep red of the Cabernet in our glasses, and highlighted the cracks in our forced smiles. Across from me, my mother, Eleanor, played her part as the gracious hostess and supportive wife. Her smile was a masterpiece of practiced artistry, never quite reaching the weary sadness in her eyes. She was a ghost at her own feast, her presence defined only by her relationship to the man at the head of the table. That man was Thomas, my stepfather. He wasn't a large man, but he occupied space with the gravity of a collapsing star, pulling all light and energy toward himself. He held his wineglass not by the stem, but by the bowl, a subtle act of dominance that always irritated me. He was telling the world, and everyone at his table, that he made the rules, even for something as trivial as etiquette. And then there was Jenna, my sister, younger by 6 years. She sat to my left, her face illuminated by the glow of her smartphone, which was never far from her perfectly manicured hands. While I worked to diffuse tension, Jenna seemed to thrive on it. She was a creature of chaos, poking and prodding at the delicate web of our family's unspoken resentments, just to watch it tremble. Her allegiance was fluid, always shifting to whoever held the most power in the moment, which, for the last decade, had been Thomas. The preliminary numbers on the logistics merger are looking even better than projected, Thomas announced, swirling the wine in his glass. He paused, ensuring he had our undivided attention. He always did. We're not just talking about a healthy quarter. We're talking about a paradigm shift, hundreds of thousands in leveraged capital returns, minimum. My mother made the appropriate sound of admiration, a soft, breathy, "Oh, Thomas, that's wonderful." It was a line she had perfected over years of practice. I offered a tight, supportive smile. "Congratulations. It sounds like a lot of hard work is paying off. This was my role. Keep it positive. Keep it moving. Don't let the silence settle." Because in the silence, the real feelings started to surface. But Jenna wasn't interested in moving on. She looked up from her phone, a sly, saccharine smile playing on her lips. She glanced from Thomas's triumphant face to my neutral one, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Hundreds of thousands," she repeated, her voice light and airy. "Wow, with that kind of money coming in, maybe you can finally get Claire to pay you back for that old loan. Mom, how much was it again?" The air conditioner inside me didn't just fail, it seized up and died. The carefully circulated peace dissipated, replaced by a sudden, sharp cold. I kept my hands steady in my lap, resisting the urge to clench them into fists. The loan. It was a wound that had never properly healed, and Jenna had just poured salt all over it. Years ago, after my father died and before Thomas entered the picture, my mother had fallen into a deep depression and a deeper financial hole. I was just starting my career in human resources, not making much, But I gave her everything I had saved, nearly $20,000, to keep the bank from foreclosing on our childhood home. It wasn't a loan, it was a lifeline. There were no terms, no papers signed. It was what a daughter did for her mother. When Thomas came along with his portfolio and his promises, the debt was conveniently reframed. In his narrative, it became a burden my mother carried, a handout from a daughter that he, the benevolent patriarch, had gracefully absorbed into the family's new, prosperous finances. It became something I was owed, but in their telling, it was something I selfishly held over them. I chose my words with the precision of a surgeon, keeping my voice low and even. I looked directly at Jenna, ignoring my mother's suddenly panicked expression. "You're mistaken. Jenna, that was money Mom borrowed from me to save the house, not the other way around." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Jenna's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of anger at being so calmly corrected. My mother stared intently at her plate, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on the china. But it was Thomas whose reaction consumed the room. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He did something far more chilling. He carefully placed his fork and knife on his plate, aligning them perfectly. Then he picked up his heavy linen napkin, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it onto the table. It landed with a soft, final thud next to the centerpiece. His eyes, cold and gray as river stones, locked onto mine. "Don't you ever," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "use that tone in my house." The implication was clear. It wasn't about the money. It was about my challenge to his narrative, to his authority. I had corrected a lie in his house, at his table, and that was a transgression he could not tolerate. I looked to my mother for support, for a word, for anything. She wouldn't meet my gaze. She shrank in her chair, making herself smaller, trying to become invisible. She was a collaborator in her own captivity, and in that moment, she had abandoned me completely. I turned to Jenna. She had her phone up again, but this time it was pointed at me. Through the screen, I could see her face, twisted in a grotesque smile of pure, unadulterated schadenfreude. She was filming my humiliation. She wasn't just a spectator, she was a documentarian of my downfall. A cold, hard fury rose in me, eclipsing the hurt. I was done. Done playing the peacekeeper in a war I could never win. Done pretending this was a family. "You know what, I'm finished," I said, my voice shaking slightly, but clear. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. The sound was a violation, a protest against the oppressive quiet. "I'm not doing this anymore." I stood up to leave, my only thought to get out, to breathe air that wasn't poisoned by their resentment and control. But as I turned, Thomas was out of his chair in a flash. His hand shot out and clamped around my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. The surprise was a jolt, a current of ice and fire through my veins. "We're not done here," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "You don't walk away from me." "Let go of me." "Thomas," I said, trying to pull my arm free. My purse was on the back of my chair, my phone in its side pocket. In my panic, in the struggle to break his grip, a frantic thought surfaced. "Call someone. Get help." "Hey, seriously, let go," I yelled, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. My phone, nestled in my purse, interpreted the first two syllables. "Hey, Siri." The quiet chime of its activation was lost in the tension of the room. And then, his hand left my arm, and for a split second, I thought he was letting me go. But it was just to build momentum. The world narrowed to a tunnel. I saw his hand coming, an open palm moving with shocking speed. The crack of it connecting with my cheek was deafening, a sharp, wet sound that echoed in the silent room. My head snapped to the side, my hair flying across my face. A burst of light exploded behind my eyes, and the taste of blood, coppery and warm, flooded my mouth. I stumbled backward, crashing against a credenza, the impact rattling the decorative plates displayed on its surface. The pain was sharp, a blooming flower of heat and shame on my skin. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard two distinct sounds. The first was the shutter click of Jenna's phone as she recorded the moment. The second was her voice, laced with a triumphant, chilling glee, raising her wineglass as if proposing a toast to my pain. "She pays." We smile, she joked. Her light, cruel laughter mingled with the sound of my ragged breathing. Dazed, I reached into my purse, my fingers fumbling for my phone. I pulled it out, my vision blurry. My thumb smeared blood across the screen as I tried to unlock it, but it was already on. The screen was black, showing the unmistakable red icon and the running timer of a video recording. My panicked plea of, "Hey," seriously had been heard. The camera was rolling. It had captured everything. The sound of the slap, Thomas's voice, and worst of all, the sound of my own sister's laughter as I fell. The morning light in my small Boston apartment was unforgiving. It sliced through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and tracing a path directly to the bathroom mirror. I had avoided my reflection since stumbling home last night, the ringing in my ears a dull, persistent hum. But you can't avoid the truth forever. I forced myself to look. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. Her left cheek was a grotesque canvas of color, a swollen bloom of deep purple and angry blue, with a faint, yellowish tinge already forming at the edges. It pulled the skin around her eye taut, making it seem smaller than the other. Her lower lip was split, a dark, vertical line crusted with dried blood. I was an HR manager. I spent my days assessing situations with professional detachment, and now I found myself assessing my own face as if it were an incident report. Injury, facial contusion, minor laceration, cause blunt force trauma. Perpetrator Thomas. I turned on the tap, the sound of the running water unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. As I leaned over to splash my face, a sharp, stinging pain from my lip made me gasp. The shock of it was clarifying. This was not an abstract incident. This was real. This was my skin, my blood. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop, a harsh, vibrating sound that made my teeth ache. I knew who it would be. I dried my face with a towel, my movements slow and deliberate. Before picking it up, the screen lit up with a message from my mother. "Morning, sweetie. Hope you're feeling okay. Please don't make a big deal out of last night. Thomas is just under a lot of stress with this new merger. He feels terrible about it." I read the text 3 times, each word a small, calculated betrayal. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm so sorry. I should have stopped him." It was a command disguised as concern. Don't make a big deal. My pain was an inconvenience to be managed. Thomas's stress was the headline, the valid reason for his violence. He feels terrible, the classic, hollow appeal for the victim to soothe the abuser's conscience. I felt a cold, heavy calm settle in my chest. I didn't reply. Deleting the message felt like a small act of defiance. Curiosity, a morbid, self-destructive impulse, led me to open Instagram. Jenna's story was the first one at the top of my feed. It was a selfie of her, smiling brightly, a mimosa in her hand. She was at brunch. The caption, written in a jaunty, looping font, was a masterpiece of casual cruelty family drama. Nah, just wine night gone wrong. The laughing crying emoji was a final digital twist of the knife. She had taken the violence, the fear, the humiliation of the night before and reduced it to a hashtag, a funny anecdote for her followers. She wasn't just erasing my pain. She was mocking it, turning it into content. My own sister. I closed the app. The image of her smiling face burned into my mind. For a moment, the professional calm shattered, and pure, unadulterated rage took its place. My hand was shaking as I swiped to my phone's keypad. My fingers, acting on their own, typed the 3 numbers that are supposed to be a lifeline, 911. My thumb hovered over the green call button. I could do it. I could report him. I could tell them everything. But what would I say? My voice caught in my throat. I could already hear the calm, professional dispatcher on the other end, and I could hear myself trying to explain. Yes, My stepfather, Thomas Nolan. Yes, of Nolan Partners. He hit me. I imagined the patrol car pulling up to his immaculate Lexington home. I imagined Thomas opening the door, his face a mask of concern and regret. He would be charming. He would be reasonable. He would explain how his stepdaughter, Claire, had been drinking, how she had become hysterical, unstable, making wild accusations after a small family disagreement. He would mention my mother, who would stand beside him, her face etched with worry, and corroborate his entire story. It would be his word, the word of a wealthy, respected businessman against mine. And what proof did I have? A bruise, a split lip, injuries that could have come from a fall. My own family would testify against me. No one will believe you. A voice in my head whispered. It was a cold, pragmatic thought. I was in HR. I knew how quickly a he said, she said situation could be dismissed, especially when one party held all the power. Defeated. I lowered my hand and deleted the numbers. The silence in my apartment felt like a surrender. But then, I remembered, it wasn't just my word. My fingers, no longer shaking, moved with a new purpose. I navigated to my phone's video library. There it was, a file created at 8:14 p.m. the previous night. The thumbnail was a chaotic blur of dark mahogany and white linen. The file size was small, but the duration was listed beneath it 1 minute and 42 seconds. I pressed play. The video was dark and jerky at first, the audio muffled as the phone recorded from inside my purse. I could hear my own voice, strained and panicked. Hey, seriously, let go. Then, the sharp, ugly crack of the slap, a sound so violent and final it made me flinch, even though I knew it was coming. It was followed by the sound of my body hitting the credenza and the faint rattle of porcelain. And then, the audio became terrifyingly clear. Jenna's voice, high and gleeful, she pays. We smile. The light clink of her wine glass, her laugh, Thomas's low growl. Now you'll learn some respect. Every word, every sound, was captured with perfect, damning clarity. It was objective. It was irrefutable. It was the truth. The fog of helplessness began to lift, replaced by the cold, clear thinking of my profession. As an HR manager for a major tech corporation, my world revolved around policy, procedure, and most importantly, documentation. I handled incident reports on a weekly basis, claims of harassment, discrimination, workplace misconduct. I knew the value of evidence, I knew the protocols, and I knew, with absolute certainty, what to do with a piece of evidence like this. You preserve it. You create a chain of custody. You never, ever let it be the only copy. My laptop was already open on my small kitchen table. I plugged in my phone, my movements efficient and precise. I didn't save the video to my personal hard drive. I didn't upload it to my personal cloud storage. I did what my professional training had drilled into me for years. I opened my corporate email account, composed a new message to my own work address, and attached the file. The subject line was blank. I hit send. As I watched the progress bar crawl to completion, I knew what I was doing on a subconscious level. Our company servers were ironclad. Everything was archived, backed up on redundant systems, and subject to periodic legal and compliance audits. Sending that email wasn't just creating a backup. It was feeding the evidence into an impartial, corporate machine, a machine designed to retain data, not to have feelings. I didn't know it at the time, but I wasn't just sending an email. I was lighting a fuse, placing a small digital spark into a system of immense, unfeeling power. The email confirmation popped up in my inbox. I dragged the message and the video file from my phone into a new folder, deep within the labyrinth of my work-related directories. I named the folder simply Audits. Inside it, I renamed the video file. I didn't call it The Slap or Jenna's Betrayal. I gave it a name that was cold, sterile, and professional. Domestic Audit MP4. I ejected my phone and deleted the original file. Then I went to my recently deleted album and permanently erased it from there too. The only copy that now existed, besides the one on the inaccessible corporate server, was the one I had just saved. An audit, an official examination of accounts, conducted by an independent body. That's what this was. I was the independent body. I closed the laptop and walked over to my window, looking down at the city streets coming to life. The rage was gone. The hurt was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs. But it was no longer in control. My professional self was the part of me that understood systems, leverage, and consequences. My family operated on a system of emotional blackmail and denial, but I had just introduced a new variable: documented, verifiable proof. I had no grand, elaborate plan for revenge. Revenge was hot, messy, and unpredictable. What I felt was something far colder, far more patient. I had planted a seed of truth in a place where it could not be easily erased. And now, I would wait. I would go to work. I would be Claire Nolan, the competent HR manager. I would be the air conditioner again. But this time, the chill would be my own. I would let them believe they had won, that I had been silenced. But silence, I now understood, was a weapon. I wouldn't seek their destruction. I would simply create the conditions for them to self-destruct. The data would do the rest. A week passed, a week of meticulous illusion. Each morning, I became an artist. My palette, an array of concealers and foundations. My canvas, the bruised and swollen landscape of my own face. With practiced strokes, I painted over the purple and blue, blending the truth into the uniform, professional beige of my skin. I became Claire Nolan, HR manager, again, unflappable, approachable, a neutral party. The mask was heavy, but I found a strange strength in its weight. The office was my sanctuary of structured denial. The low, constant hum of the servers, the scent of slightly burnt coffee from the communal kitchen, the rhythmic click-clack of keyboards. It was a symphony of purposeful routine. Here, emotions were unprofessional. Problems were reduced to action items and ticket numbers. Everything could be managed, categorized, and filed away. It was in this predictable world that I felt most in control, even as the chaos of my personal life simmered just beneath the surface. Then, on a Tuesday that had begun like any other, the two worlds collided. It started with an email, a chipper, company-wide announcement from the head of marketing. Please join us in giving a warm welcome to our new fall interns. I scanned the list of names and headshots, and there she was, Jenna Nolan. Her picture was professionally perfect, her smile wide and bright, her eyes full of the manufactured ambition required for a corporate internship. The accompanying bio was a masterpiece of fiction, mentioning her passion for brand synergy and her excitement to join a dynamic, forward-thinking team. There was no mention of her passion for filming domestic assaults. My blood ran cold. Of all the companies in Boston, she had to come here, to my territory. It couldn't be a coincidence. This was a power play, orchestrated by Thomas, a way to keep me in line, to remind me that his reach extended even into my professional sanctuary. I saw her for the first time later that morning by the filtered water cooler. She was holding a new branded company thermos, laughing at something one of the senior marketing managers said. She looked radiant, dressed in an outfit that cost more than my monthly car payment. When she saw me, her smile didn't falter for a second. It broadened. Claire. Oh my God. I was going to come find you, she chirped, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. She rushed over and gave me a one-armed, air kiss by the cheek hug that was purely for show. Isn't this crazy? We're going to be working together. It's going to be so much fun. I stood there, rigid, the plastic cup in my hand threatening to crack under the pressure of my grip. I looked into her eyes, searching for any flicker of shame, any hint of acknowledgement for what had happened less than 10 days ago. There was nothing. It was like looking into the polished, empty eyes of a doll. The memory of her laughing, of her saying, "She pays." We smile, felt like a phantom limb, an ache from a part of me that she had helped amputate. Welcome to the company, Jenna, I said, my voice a perfectly modulated, professionally pleasant tone. I was the HR manager welcoming a new intern. Nothing more. Her performance was flawless. She played the part of the adoring little sister to perfection, telling her new colleagues, "My sister is so brilliant. I've always looked up to her." They smiled at me, their faces full of vicarious warmth. If they only knew. The second collision came 2 days later, in the form of a meeting request that appeared in my calendar. Title: Project Titan. Partnership Synergy Session. Attendees: my boss, the Director of HR, the VP of Strategy, and the CEO of our key investment partner for the merger, Nolan Partners. Thomas. I was listed as the HR representative responsible for the cultural integration assessment. My presence was mandatory. I walked into the glass-walled boardroom, feeling like an actor stepping onto a stage for a play I had never rehearsed. Thomas was already there, holding court, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his laugh effortlessly charming. He was captivating. My colleagues were leaning in, nodding, soaking up his aura of power and success. He was the visionary, the rainmaker. I was the only person in the room who knew he was also a man who hit women. When he saw me, his smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He excused himself from his conversation and walked over to me, his hand extended, in front of my boss. I had no choice but to take it. His grip was firm, his palm dry and cool. It was the same hand that had struck my face. "Claire," he said, his voice a smooth, deep baritone. "Good to see you looking well." His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to the side of my face where the last of the yellowing bruise was hidden under makeup. It was a subtle, cruel acknowledgement, a reminder. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that no one else could hear. His breath smelled of expensive coffee and mint. Family should stick together. Claire, especially when there's so much at stake. It wasn't advice, it was a threat, delivered with the casual confidence of a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. The old me would have flinched, looked away, surrendered, but the old me had died on his dining room floor. I held his gaze, a polite, professional smile fixed on my face. "Of course," I said, my voice just as quiet, just as level. "Only when family acts like one." I saw a flash of surprise, then anger, in his eyes before he masked it. Turning away to greet my boss with a booming laugh, I had returned serve. The game had changed. Within hours, the rumors started. They spread through the office's internal messaging system and whispered conversations in the break room. "Did you hear the Nolan Partners CEO is Claire Nolan's stepfather?" Suddenly, I wasn't just Claire from HR, I was an heiress, a corporate princess. My colleagues looked at me with a new kind of deference, a mixture of envy and awe. They assumed my career was a product of nepotism, that my position was a gift from the powerful man in the boardroom. The irony was a physical weight. I sat in meetings, taking notes on synergy and shareholder value, while the architects of my private misery were being celebrated as titans of industry. I felt completely and utterly alone, a silent observer in a grand, elaborate farce. I was watching a play where everyone was wearing a mask, but I was the only one who knew it. They saw a powerful family closing a massive deal. I saw a crime scene. But as I sat there, in the sterile chill of the conference room, listening to Thomas pontificate about corporate ethics, a single thought kept me anchored, a secret that I held close, a small, cold point of light in the overwhelming darkness. They didn't know about the file. They didn't know that a 1-minute and 42-second recording of the unvarnished truth was sitting on the very servers that powered this building. Domestic Audit, MP4. It was a digital ghost in their machine, a silent witness. And then I remembered something else, a detail from a mandatory data security training I had conducted last quarter. It was a tedious, technical point that had made most people's eyes glaze over. But to me, it was everything. Our company had a strict data governance policy, implemented after a minor data breach 2 years prior. To prevent the loss or concealment of sensitive information, any media file over a certain size that was transferred from an external device like a personal cell phone to the corporate email network was automatically mirrored. A copy was created and firewalled in a separate high-security compliance server. The system would then generate an automated, low-priority flag on a report that was reviewed, on a quarterly basis, by the Legal and Compliance Department. I had sent the email to myself for a backup. I had acted on instinct. But the system, the impartial, unfeeling, automated system, had already gone a step further. It had followed its programming. It had, without any human intervention, delivered a copy of my audit directly to a digital vault accessible only by the company's lawyers. I didn't have to leak the video. I didn't have to become a whistleblower. I didn't have to do anything at all. The spark had already been set. The fuse was lit and was now smoldering quietly in a server rack 3 floors below me. I looked across the table at Thomas, who was smiling, all confidence and charisma. I glanced at the doorway, where Jenna was dropping off a folder for her new boss, giving me a tiny, triumphant wave. They thought they were untouchable. They were moving their chess pieces around the board, thinking they were in complete control of the game. But they were playing in a world of whispers, threats, and lies. My world was now the world of data, protocol, and process. I just had to keep my mask on, play my part, and let the system do what it was designed to do. I just had to be silent. The rest, as they say, would speak for itself. The summons arrived not as a phone call or a casual request, but as a formal, unadorned meeting invitation in my email. It was from the executive assistant of Cynthia Davenport, the regional director of human resources, a woman I reported to but rarely interacted with directly. The subject line contained just 2 words, urgent matter. There was no agenda attached, no list of attendees beyond Cynthia and myself. It was a blank space of corporate authority, and my mind immediately began to fill it in. For 3 days, I had existed in a state of suspended animation. I went through the motions of my job, resolving payroll disputes and editing onboarding documents, all while a silent, internal clock ticked down. Jenna had been insufferably cheerful at the office, a walking, talking performance of corporate enthusiasm. Thomas had been a ghost, a name mentioned in hushed, reverent tones in conversations about the impending merger. The world continued to spin on its axis of polite fictions, but I knew about the file. I knew the truth was lying dormant in the system, a digital landmine waiting for a single, inadvertent step. This invitation was that step. I took the elevator to the 35th floor, the executive wing. The air up here was different, thinner, quieter. The carpet was plusher, absorbing the sound of my footsteps, and the art on the walls was real. Not the mass-produced prints that hung in the rest of the office. It was a floor designed to insulate power from the noise of everyday business. Cynthia Davenport's office was an extension of her personality, minimalist, immaculate, and intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Boston skyline, but the overall effect wasn't expansive. It was isolating, as if we were floating above the rest of the world. Cynthia was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her late 50s with a reputation for being as brilliant as she was unsentimental. She was HR in its purest, most formidable form. She was not alone. Sitting in the other guest chair was a man I recognized from the company directory, Robert Thorne, senior counsel from the legal department. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird, but my training took over. I smoothed my skirt, kept my expression neutral, and projected an aura of calm competence. I was Claire Nolan, HR manager, here to assist with a problem. "Claire, thank you for coming on such short notice," Cynthia said, her voice cool and even. She gestured to the empty chair. "Please, have a seat. This is Robert Thorne from legal." I shook his hand. It was as dry and firm as a legal document. "Of course. How can I help?" I asked, my voice steady. Cynthia didn't engage in small talk. She folded her hands on the polished surface of her desk. A barrier between us. "Claire, we're dealing with a sensitive and highly confidential situation. A report has been flagged by our automated compliance system that indicates potential gross misconduct involving a key business partner." Thorne cleared his throat, his voice a dry rustle of paper. "To be specific," he added, "a report of suspected domestic violence." The words hung in the sterile, air-conditioned space. This was the moment. My performance had to be flawless. I allowed a look of professional concern, mixed with a hint of confusion, to cross my face. I held Cynthia's gaze. "I'm sorry. I don't understand," I said, letting just enough bewilderment into my tone. "A report from who, an employee?" "The report is the issue itself," Cynthia replied, her eyes never leaving mine. She was assessing me, reading every micro-expression. The system flagged a media file that was transferred onto our network. A video. I swallowed. A deliberate, noticeable motion. I let my brow furrow. A video. What does this have to do with me? This was the part that felt most like a betrayal of my own reality. Pretending I didn't know what was coming. Pretending that the contents of that file hadn't been seared into my memory. "The file was transferred from your personal device and emailed to your corporate account," Thorne stated, his tone flat, factual. Cynthia leaned forward slightly. Ordinarily, this would be a simple policy violation discussion. However, given the content of the video and its direct relevance to the ongoing Project Titan merger, "This has escalated. The partner in question is Nolan Partners." She paused, letting the name land, "and the individuals in the video have been tentatively identified as its CEO, Thomas Nolan, and his daughter, Jenna Nolan." I widened my eyes, playing the part of the shocked, horrified family member. That's impossible." Cynthia's gaze was penetrating. "We need you to confirm. Claire, we are going to show you the video. We need to know if it's authentic." She swiveled a laptop on her desk to face me. My own reflection stared back at me for a second from the dark screen before she clicked the mouse. The play button appeared. She clicked it again. My breath caught in my throat. The video filled the screen. My own purse's chaotic, muffled view of a mahogany table, then my own voice, tinny and desperate through the laptop's speakers. "Hey, seriously, let go." The sound of the slap was obscene in the silent, professional office. It was a wet, concussive crack that made both Cynthia and Thorne flinch, their professional composure momentarily broken. I forced myself to remain perfectly still, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. I watched the screen as my own body crashed into the credenza. Then came Jenna's voice, chillingly clear and cheerful. "She pays. We smile." Her laughter filled the room, a grotesque counterpoint to the sound of my own ragged breathing. The video ended. The screen went black. The only sound was the faint whir of the laptop's fan. A full 30 seconds passed in absolute silence. Cynthia and Thorne were not looking at the screen. They were looking at me. I stared down at my hands, at the pale, steady knuckles. I took a slow, measured breath before looking up. I met Cynthia's gaze directly. I have never shared this video with anyone," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but clear. I let a tremor of emotion, of genuine shock, enter my voice. It wasn't hard to find. Cynthia nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "We know. Claire, we tracked the file's metadata. You sent it to your work email as a personal backup. You never forwarded it. You never downloaded it to your work machine. It came from the internal backup system," Thorne elaborated, picking up the procedural thread. "As per the Data Governance and Security Protocol, Section 4, Subsection B, the system's automated content filter flagged the file's audio signature for keywords related to conflict. The file was then mirrored to the legal compliance server for review. The discovery was entirely automated. It was the system that brought this to our attention, not you." I nodded, absorbing his words, my mind a whirl of cold, triumphant calculation. It was perfect, better than I could have ever planned. The evidence was pristine, discovered through impartial corporate mechanisms. The chain of custody was unbreakable. I was not the accuser. I was not the whistleblower. I was simply another employee, another victim, discovered by the logical, unfeeling processes I had once helped to write. I was shielded by the very bureaucracy that Thomas sought to control. "Claire," Cynthia said, her voice softening for the first time, It was the voice of an HR director shifting from investigator to counselor. "We understand this is incredibly difficult. We need to ask, are you in a safe situation?" "I am," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I live alone. I am safe." "Good," she said, "because this changes things. Given the evidence, the board has to be notified. An immediate, independent inquiry will be launched into the ethical and legal conduct of Nolan Partners and its CEO. The merger negotiations will be suspended, effective immediately." I just nodded again, as if processing the information. "For now," Thorne said, closing the laptop, "your involvement in this discovery is to be kept in the strictest confidence, for your own protection and for the integrity of the investigation. You do not speak of this to anyone. Is that understood?" "Yes," I said, "completely." They dismissed me a few minutes later with solemn assurances and instructions. I walked out of the office, down the silent executive hallway, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, I finally allowed myself to breathe. Back at my desk, the world was exactly as I had left it. An employee had sent me a question about paternity leave. A manager was asking for the latest draft of a performance review template. The mundane rhythm of the office was unchanged, but I was a different person. I was no longer a victim waiting for a chance. I was a catalyst. I looked at my computer screen, at the blinking cursor on a blank email, and I thought of Thomas. He was probably in a meeting right now, charming a room full of executives, completely unaware that a silent, digital bomb had just been placed under the foundation of his entire empire. He had no idea that a 1-minute and 42-second video, discovered by a machine, was at this very moment being escalated to the highest levels of corporate power. He would be ruined not by my anger, but by his own actions, played back in high-fidelity audio. In a few hours, the first call would come, then another, and he would begin the process of destroying himself with lies and denials, never knowing that I was the one who had quietly, almost accidentally, started the mechanism months ago. He would blame a leak, a hacker, a conspiracy. He would never suspect that the truth had simply been audited. The corporate nervous system moves faster than gossip. Before the end of the day, a series of discreet but urgent calendar invitations had propagated through the executive level. A mandatory, emergency meeting for the board of directors was scheduled for 8:00 a.m. the following morning. The agenda was a single, ominous line: review of critical new information pertaining to Project Titan and partner due diligence. The storm was making landfall. I was not in that room, but I had spent enough years in corporate environments to imagine the scene with perfect clarity. The long, polished table, the faces of the board members, a gallery of stone-faced men and women who measured the world in quarterly earnings and shareholder value. Cynthia Davenport would have presented the situation with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon, outlining the discovery of the file as a failure of ethical conduct on the part of a potential partner. Robert Thorne would have followed, articulating the immense legal, financial, and reputational risks the company would incur by associating with an individual and a company implicated in such a matter. And then, the screening. I pictured the moment the video played in that soundproofed room, the ugly, raw sounds of violence and cruelty echoing off the expensive wood paneling. I imagined the stunned silence that followed, the exchanged glances, the immediate, cold calculus of damage control. This was no longer a family matter. It was a multi-million-dollar liability. Thomas was summoned later that morning. He would have walked into the lion's den believing he was the lion. Assuming the emergency meeting was about a last-minute snag in the merger, he could smooth over with his signature blend of charm and intimidation. They didn't accuse him at first. They simply asked him if there were any undisclosed personal matters that might affect the partnership. He would have denied it, of course, a smooth, confident denial, perhaps even with a theatrical, self-deprecating laugh. "My personal life is an open book," he would have said, and that's when they would have played it for him. I imagined his face as he heard his own voice, distorted and menacing, snarl from the speakers, "Don't talk that way in my house." I pictured the blood draining from his face, the confident posture collapsing by a single, critical inch. I imagined his frantic, sputtering denials, his attempts to reframe, to contextualize, to lie. He'd call it a doctored video, a setup, a misunderstanding, a bitter family squabble taken out of context by a hysterical stepdaughter. But the tremor in his voice when he heard his own words would have betrayed him. The board would have seen it. They were experts at spotting weakness. And in that moment, Thomas was nothing but... The containment field broke just after lunch. How the video began to spread internally was a mystery. But I had my suspicions. In her panic, Jenna must have tried to do something. Perhaps a friendly colleague in legal gave her a heads up that a compliance issue involving her family had been flagged. In a desperate attempt at damage control, she might have tried to delete a copy she had on her work-issued laptop. But our company's data loss prevention software was ruthless. The moment a sensitive, flagged file is targeted for deletion, the system automatically creates multiple new encrypted backups and alerts the IT security anomaly team. In trying to extinguish the spark, she had thrown gasoline on the fire. By mid-afternoon, the video was an open secret, a ghost moving through the company's servers. It was being forwarded in encrypted emails between senior managers, discussed in hushed tones in private chat channels. The whispers became a roar. Thomas Nolan wasn't a visionary CEO. He was a liability. He was a monster. It took less than 5 hours for the internal crisis to breach the corporate firewall and explode into the public domain. An anonymous tip, likely from a disgruntled employee with a grudge or a savvy one who had shorted Nolan Partners stock, found its way to a reporter at a major financial news outlet. At 4:02 p.m., a headline hit the wire, and my phone, along with every other phone in the financial world, lit up with the push notification. Corporate partner in tech merger. Accused of domestic abuse. Video surfaces. The article was brutal, efficient, and filled with the kind of damning, unattributed quotes that could only have come from inside sources. It described a disturbing video and a toxic culture of impunity. The carefully constructed facade of Thomas Nolan, respected businessman, had been shattered in a single news cycle. Jenna's digital world imploded. Her vibrant, curated Instagram feed, usually a relentless stream of brunches, fashion, and aspirational hashtags, went dark. Her profile picture vanished, replaced by the generic gray avatar of a deactivated account. She had built her entire identity on public visibility, and now, faced with a truth she couldn't filter or caption, she simply ceased to exist. My own phone rang at 4:30 p.m. The caller ID read, "Mom." I let it ring twice before answering, bracing myself. I did not have to wait long. "Claire, what have you done?" Her voice was a raw, ragged shriek, frayed with panic and disbelief. There was no greeting, just the raw, undiluted accusation. "I haven't done anything." "Mom," I replied, my voice perfectly calm. I was sitting at my desk, watching the afternoon light slant across my keyboard. "Don't you lie to me," she wailed, her voice breaking. "The news, the company. Thomas is ruined. Our lives are ruined. This is because of you and your vindictiveness." I took a slow sip of the lukewarm coffee in my mug. The bitterness grounded me. "This has nothing to do with me," I said, the words coming out as cold and clear as ice. "Thomas is the one who raised his hand. Jenna is the one who laughed. The video is the one that recorded it. I didn't do anything. You could have stopped this. You could have deleted it." "No," I said, the single word hanging between us, sharp and final. "I couldn't. It was on the company servers. It's just data, Mom, and the data is speaking for itself." She sobbed into the phone, a torrent of incoherent, desperate pleas and curses. But I felt nothing. The part of me that would have once been racked with guilt was gone, cauterized by the slap and the laughter that followed. I listened for another moment to the sounds of her world collapsing. Then I quietly ended the call. The official corporate statement was released an hour later. Thomas Nolan had been suspended, indefinitely, from his position as CEO of Nolan Partners, pending a full investigation. The board of my company announced that the Project Titan merger was under comprehensive review. It was the corporate equivalent of a death sentence. I watched the stock ticker for Nolan Partners on my second monitor. It was a waterfall of red. It had dropped 14% in the final 2 hours of trading. Millions of dollars in value, wiped out by 1 minute and 42 seconds of truth. The office was emptying out around me, my colleagues packing up their bags, their faces grim, talking in low voices about the scandal. But at my desk, in my small and controlled space, everything was quiet. The only sounds were the gentle hum of my computer and the soft, rhythmic tapping of my own keyboard as I finished my final report of the day. It was the sound of order, the sound of a system working exactly as it should. I had done nothing at all, and in doing nothing, I had burned their whole world to the ground. The 2 days following the explosion were a surreal performance. At the office, I was no longer just Claire Nolan, HR manager. I had been recast as St. Clair, the tragic victim. Colleagues who once offered polite nods in the hallway now approached me with faces of deeply furrowed concern. They would lower their voices, touch my arm gently, and ask if I was holding up okay. They brought me coffee I didn't ask for and offered to take tasks off my plate. They saw a fragile woman who had been wronged, a damsel in the path of a corporate dragon. They meant well, and they were completely wrong. I was not the damsel. I was the one who had opened the dragon's cage. I was at my desk, reviewing a benefits enrollment form and pretending to be absorbed in the mundane details, when a frantic movement at my office door broke my concentration. It was Jenna. She looked nothing like the polished, ambitious intern from the week before. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her face was pale and blotchy, and the remnants of smeared mascara were tracked beneath her red-rimmed eyes. She looked like a ghost haunting the scene of her own demise. She didn't knock. She slipped inside and pushed the door shut, the click of the latch echoing in the quiet space. She stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, her hands twisting the strap of her ridiculously expensive handbag. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "They deactivated my intern badge," she whispered. As if this were the primary injustice, I had to beg the security guard to let me up. I didn't say anything. I simply swiveled in my chair to face her, folded my hands on my desk, and waited. I had learned the power of silence. It forces the guilty to fill it. "I saw the news," she finally choked out, her gaze fixed on a framed stock photo of a rowing team on my wall. I can't believe this is happening." She finally looked at me, her eyes swimming with a desperate, self-pitying plea. "Claire, I swear to you, I didn't know that video still existed. I thought you deleted it." A cold, sharp amusement cut through me. The sheer, breathtaking narcissism of her statement was almost impressive. Her first thought was not of the violence, but of the evidence. I leaned back in my chair, the slight creak of the leather filling the silence. "Did you really think that—" "Jenna," I asked, my voice calm, almost conversational. It was the tone I used when explaining a complex policy to a new hire. "Did you think that in a world of cloud backups and server redundancies, something you record on your phone and then delete simply vanishes into the ether? You worked in marketing. For God's sake, you of all people should know. Nothing in the digital world is ever truly gone. It just waits." Her face crumpled. The logic of my statement was an impenetrable wall against her emotional pleading. "But it was a joke," she stammered, shaking her head in frantic denial. "That's what Thomas said. He told me I was just being funny, breaking the tension. He said we were all just drinking and having a laugh." I stared at her. I let the utter, pathetic weakness of her excuse hang in the air between us. A joke. She had watched my head snap back from the force of a blow. She had heard the sound of flesh hitting flesh. She had filmed my humiliation, and she had concluded it was a comedic moment. The person being hit wasn't laughing. "Jenna," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a correction to the record, an audit. That's when the real tears came. Not the self-pitying welling she'd walked in with, but a full-blown, body-racking sob. She collapsed into the guest chair opposite my desk, her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving. "You don't understand," she wailed through her fingers. "He's going to destroy me." I felt a flicker of something, a distant cousin of curiosity. He already did. "Jenna, or have you forgotten?" "No," she cried, looking up, her face a mess of tears and running makeup. "Now. He called me this morning. He was screaming. He said this is all my fault. He said I'm the one who filmed it, that I was trying to set him up. He's telling his lawyers that I was part of a conspiracy to slander him, to extort him. He's going to feed me to them, Claire. He's going to tell the world that I did this to him." And then, a sound escaped my lips that I hadn't expected. A laugh. It wasn't a sound of joy or humor. It was a short, sharp bark of a sound, utterly devoid of warmth. It was the sound of irony so profound it became its own form of punctuation. Jenna stared at me, her mouth falling open in shock. "Good," I said, the smile on my face feeling alien and sharp. "Excellent. So, the great Thomas Nolan, the master of the universe, is finally scared. He's finally realized he's trapped. So he's doing what all cornered animals do. He's trying to bite the weakest thing in the cage with him." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And Jenna, that's you. So you should be scared, too. You should be terrified." "Why are you being like this?" she sobbed. "You're my sister." "Because you laughed," I said, the words like ice chips. "You stood there, with your phone in your hand, and you toasted my assault. You laughed. So, no, I am not going to help you. I am not going to comfort you. You made an investment that night. Jenna, you bet on Thomas, and your portfolio has just collapsed. These are your consequences. Enjoy them." She continued to cry, her pleas dissolving into incoherent muttering. I just watched her, my face a blank mask, my office, a space of order and process, had become her confessional, and I was her unmerciful priest. My phone was on the desk beside me, face down. Before she'd even finished her first sentence, I had discreetly tapped the side button, twice the shortcut I'd programmed to start a voice memo. It was recording everything, her pathetic excuses, her terrified confession about Thomas's threats. It was all being captured, another pristine piece of data for the audit. As she finally cried herself out, gathering the shredded pieces of her dignity to leave, I thought about the people outside my door, my well-meaning colleagues. In their eyes, I was the victim, a woman enduring an unimaginable family trauma. They thought my silence was a sign of shock, of pain. They were wrong. Victimhood is a passive state. It is something that is done to you. What I was doing was active, deliberate, and precise. I hadn't thrown a punch or screamed for revenge. I had simply entered the truth into the ledger and allowed the system, corporate, legal, and now karmic, to balance the books. After Jenna left, a phantom of her former self. I picked up my phone. I stopped the recording. A new file appeared in my voice memos. I renamed it with the same cold, clinical precision as before. Part 2, M4A. People thought I was the one who had been audited by violence, but the truth was far simpler. I was the auditor of their karma, and the accounting was just getting started. The time for waiting was over. The time for auditing was done. Now, it was time to present the findings. I opened my corporate email account, the cursor blinking on a blank screen. My fingers moved with a cold, steady purpose. To Thomas Nolan. From Claire Nolan. Subject meeting. The body of the email contained a single, unadorned sentence. "We need to talk, privately." I hit send. His reply came in under 5 minutes. He was a man drowning, and he thought I was throwing him a rope. He didn't realize it was an anchor. He agreed to meet the next day, suggesting a neutral location, a sterile corporate lawyer's office downtown. I countered. My office building, a guest conference room on my floor. I wanted him on my territory, surrounded by the architecture of his own demise. He reluctantly agreed. My next step was a matter of protocol. I forwarded the email chain to Cynthia Davenport and Robert Thorne with a simple note. FYI, Mr. Nolan has requested a meeting. I have agreed. As this is related to an active investigation, I would feel more secure if corporate security could be discreetly present. I was the cautious employee, following the rules, ensuring my own safety. I was also positioning my key witnesses just outside the door. The conference room I booked was a small, glass-walled box, designed for sensitive conversations. I arrived 10 minutes early and set the stage. I placed a single bottle of water on his side of the table and nothing on mine. On the table, next to my phone, I placed a small, unmarked USB flash drive. It was black, anonymous, and contained the full weight of his future. Thomas arrived precisely on time. He had attempted to project his old aura of command, dressed in a bespoke suit that screamed power, but the illusion was frayed at the edges. There was a new tension in the set of his jaw, a deep, weary exhaustion behind his eyes that no amount of tailored wool could conceal. He was a king whose castle was crumbling around him, and he had come to negotiate with the architect of the earthquake. He closed the door behind him, and for a moment, we just looked at each other across the polished table. He was assessing me, trying to find the frightened, pliable woman he had dominated for years. She was gone. In her place was an HR manager with a file on him, and he was beginning to understand that. He broke the silence, his voice a low, gravelly attempt at conciliation. "Claire, thank you for agreeing to this. I know things have been difficult." I said nothing. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a long, thin envelope. He slid it across the table. It stopped a few inches from my folded hands. "I want to put this unfortunate family matter behind us," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. "I was under a great deal of stress. I was wrong, and I want to make it right." I glanced down at the envelope. Through the thin paper, I could see the crisp blue lines of a personal check. "This is $50,000, he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "A gesture of my sincerity. It should be more than enough to help you. Move on. Start fresh. We can release a joint statement. Say the video was a misunderstanding, and this all goes away. The merger gets back on track, and everyone is happy." I looked from the check back to his face. He was trying to transact with me, to put a price on my silence, on my pain. He still believed that everything, and everyone, had a price. It was the fundamental philosophy of his life, and it was about to be proven wrong. I didn't touch the envelope. Instead, I picked up the small, black USB drive and slid it across the table toward him. It was a mirror image of his own gesture, a quiet, definitive rejection of his terms and a presentation of mine. "Before we discuss my price," I said, my voice even and cold, "I think you should review this." He looked at the flash drive with suspicion. "What is it?" "Let's call it an addendum to the current file," I said, "a second audit." He hesitated, then pulled his slim, expensive laptop from his briefcase. He plugged in the drive, his movements stiff. A single file popped up on the screen. Heart. He clicked on it. The sound of Jenna's frantic, weeping voice filled the small conference room. It was my sister at her most raw, her most terrified. "He's going to destroy me. Claire, he said this is all my fault, that I was part of a conspiracy to slander him. He's going to feed me to them." I watched Thomas's face. The mask of confident magnanimity dissolved, replaced by a ghastly, pale shock. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, gray sheen. He was hearing his own strategy, his own betrayal. Described by his most loyal co-conspirator, the first video had proved his violence. This recording proved his guilt, his conspiracy to obstruct justice, his willingness to sacrifice his own stepdaughter to save himself. It was a checkmate I knew he could not have anticipated. He snapped the laptop shut, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. He looked at me, and for the first time, all the masks were gone. I saw him for what he truly was, a weak, terrified man, stripped of all his power. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. It was the question of a man who knew he had already lost. I leaned forward, my hands still clasped on the table. This was not a negotiation. This was a verdict. First, I began, ticking the points off in my mind. You will contact the board of my company and voluntarily withdraw Nolan Partners from the merger negotiations. You will cite personal health reasons. You will make it clean and quick, and you will not breathe a word of this to anyone. You will absorb the financial loss and the damage to your reputation in silence. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Second, I continued, my voice unwavering, you will disappear. You will initiate divorce proceedings with my mother. You will provide her with a settlement so generous that she will never have to worry about money again. And in exchange, she will sign a permanent non-disclosure agreement. Then you will remove yourself from our lives. You will sell any stock you hold in this company or its subsidiaries. You will never contact me, my mother, or Jenna again. You will cease to exist in our world. He found his voice, a ragged, incredulous rasp. You can't ask for that. This is my life's work, this merger. Your life's work is over, I stated, cutting him off. He slammed his hand on the table, a pathetic echo of his old power. I'll fight you, he snarled, a cornered animal baring his teeth. I'll drag you down with me. I'll tell them you doctored this evidence. That you're extorting me, I'll ruin you. A slow smile spread across my face. It was the first genuine smile he had seen from me in years, and it terrified him. No, you won't, I said, my voice soft, almost a purr. I tapped my phone, which was still on the table. Automated backup, remember? The comprehension dawned on his face, a final, crushing wave of despair. He understood. This conversation, this recording, his threats, my demands, it was all just more data, and the system was always listening. He wasn't fighting me anymore. He was fighting an algorithm, and he had already lost. I stood up, my chair making no sound on the carpet. I left his check on the table. I left him with the USB drive. I left him with the ruins of his life sitting in a small glass box. You have 24 hours to make the call. Thomas, I said as I walked to the door. I didn't look back as I opened it. Standing in the hallway, looking discreetly in the other direction, were Robert Thorne and the head of our corporate security division. Thorne met my eyes. I gave him a single, slow nod. The trap was sprung, the audit was complete, and the debt was about to be paid in full. Thomas Nolan folded in less than 12 hours. The first tremor hit the financial markets at 9:01 a.m. the next morning, in the form of a sterile, jargon-laden press release issued by Nolan Partners. It announced, with deep regret, that its founder and CEO was withdrawing from the $180 million merger negotiations with my company, citing urgent and unforeseen personal health matters. It was the kind of polite, corporate lie that was meant to smooth over a disaster. A thin layer of drywall mud over a gaping hole in the foundation. The media, smelling blood in the water, was not fooled for a second. The lie was torn apart within the hour. The headlines were a rapid-fire barrage, a digital blitzkrieg that consumed the news cycle. The Financial Chronicle was first Nolan Partners CEO withdraws from 180 WAs. Merger. Amid abuse scandal. TechCrunch followed, framing it for the industry source video in Nolan abuse allegations confirmed as an internal compliance leak, not a hack. Forbes delivered the analysis, the high cost of moral turpitude, how a single video erased a billion-dollar valuation. The narrative was solidifying, and it was a narrative I had helped shape from the shadows. Anonymous sources from within my company, a narrative carefully managed by Cynthia and the legal team, confirmed that the video had been discovered through routine, automated compliance protocols, a forensic analysis, commissioned by the board, and conveniently leaked to a trusted journalist, confirmed the video's authenticity, stating there was no evidence of digital manipulation or tampering. I was not the source, I was not the leak, I was merely the subject. The system itself was the protagonist, an impartial machine that had uncovered a rot. In this story, I was unimpeachable. Jenna's digital ghost town was a testament to the fallout. Her Instagram, once a vibrant monument to her own self-interest, was a void. Her Twitter, a barren landscape, her LinkedIn profile, which had proudly listed her prestigious new internship, had been scrubbed from the platform. In a world where digital existence is paramount, she had performed a digital suicide. She had nowhere to post, nothing to say, and no one who wanted to see her. She had simply vanished. My mother's final communication came that evening. It wasn't a call. She didn't have the courage for that. It was a text message, a small, bitter pill of digital text. "You won. Are you happy now?" I stared at the glowing words on the screen. The question was a relic from her world, a world of emotional transactions, of winners and losers. She couldn't comprehend the landscape I now inhabited. Winning implies a game. Happiness implies an emotional investment. This was neither. This was a correction, an audit. It was the cold, satisfying click of a dislocated joint being snapped back into place. There was no joy in it, only a profound and quiet sense of order restored. I didn't reply. I deleted the message and blocked her number. The collapse of Nolan Partners was a case study in corporate mortality. It was swift, brutal, and total. The company had been built not on assets or infrastructure, but on the cult of personality around one man, Thomas Nolan. When his reputation was executed in the public square, the company bled out with it. First, the key investors pulled their funding, invoking the moral turpitude clauses buried deep in their contracts. Then the clients followed suit, unwilling to have their brands associated with a scandal of this magnitude. A wave of mass resignations swept through the company's upper management, as executives scrambled to get off the sinking ship before their own careers were permanently stained. The stock, which had been wounded before, was now in a terminal nosedive. I watched its ticker symbol on my monitor throughout the week. A morbid curiosity. I watched it go from red numbers to a flat line to the final, damning designation, delisted. In 7 days, a corporate empire had been reduced to a cautionary tale for business school ethics classes. On Friday, a week after my meeting with Thomas, I was summoned again to the 35th floor. This time, it wasn't to a sterile conference room. It was to the expansive corner office of our company's chief executive officer, a man I had only ever seen on stage at company-wide town halls. He stood up when I walked in, his hand extended, his face a mask of solemn sincerity. "Claire," he said, his voice the kind of deep, reassuring baritone that commanded respect. "Please, sit. I wanted to speak with you personally, on behalf of the entire board. I want to commend you for your fortitude during what I can only imagine has been an unbearable ordeal." I sat, my posture straight, my expression neutral. "This company," he continued, steepling his fingers, "is built on a foundation of trust and ethical conduct. What you endured, and how this situation came to light, has been a sobering reminder of why that matters." He looked at me, a calculated look of admiration in his eyes. "Cynthia Davenport tells me your work has always been exemplary. But this goes beyond that. You have shown us what it means to have true character." He cleared his throat, getting to the point. "We're creating a new position, Vice President of Corporate Integrity and Employee Relations. It's a significant step up. The board and I are in unanimous agreement. We want you to be the one to lead it." He smiled. "Integrity matters. Claire, we want to reward that." I felt the words wash over me, a perfectly crafted corporate narrative. They were crowning me, the victim, as a hero. It was good for morale, good for the brand, a story of a righteous woman being rewarded for her silent strength. I accepted the promotion with the requisite amount of humility and gratitude, but as I shook his hand, a different thought, cold and clear, echoed in my mind. No, integrity doesn't matter, not on its own. My integrity would have left me bruised and silenced in a Lexington dining room. My integrity would have been my word against the word of a powerful, wealthy man, and I would have lost. What saved me was not a virtue. It was a system, a cold, unfeeling, automated data retention policy. I wasn't being promoted for my character. I was being promoted because my personal trauma had been conveniently captured and processed by a server rack in the basement. I owed my salvation not to a person, but to a protocol. That night, back in the quiet sanctuary of my own apartment, I performed one final act of my audit. I took out a small, encrypted external hard drive from a locked drawer. I connected it to my laptop and transferred a single file to it from a hidden folder, the original, the raw data from my phone, before it had been sent, copied, and mirrored. I renamed it for the last time, Domestic Audit MP4. I would never delete it. It wasn't a trophy. It was a ledger. It was the source code of my new life, a permanent, verifiable record of the truth. It was my own personal backup, a silent promise to myself that I would never again be in a situation where my word was the only evidence I had. A month passed. My new life began to take shape, built on the foundations of my old one, but with a different architecture. The promotion was official. I had a new title, a larger office on the 35th floor, and a mandate to rebuild the company's ethical framework from the ground up. I was good at it. My work was precise, my judgment impartial, my decisions rooted in the unassailable logic of policy and consequence. I had become the human embodiment of the system that had saved me. My days were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and the quiet, satisfying work of creating order. My nights were my own, reclaimed spaces of silence in my small apartment, a world away from the noise of the collapse. I was settled into that quiet one evening, reading on my couch with a cup of tea, when a hesitant knock echoed from my apartment door. It was a sound so out of place in my new, insulated world that I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. My mother was an excised part of my life, and my colleagues communicated through email and Slack. I walked to the door, my heart a steady, cautious drum. I looked through the peephole. The distorted fisheye view showed me a face I almost didn't recognize. It was Jenna, but it was a version of her that had been stripped of all its former gloss. She was painfully thin, her expensive coat hanging from her shoulders as if from a wire hanger. Her face, devoid of its usual mask of makeup, was sallow and gaunt, dominated by large, haunted eyes. She was just standing there, her arms wrapped around herself, trembling slightly in the hallway's dim light. My first instinct was to do nothing, to remain silent, a ghost in my own home, and wait for her to leave. She was a relic of a past I had successfully archived, but another part of me, the auditor, the part that needs to see every process through to its conclusion, took over. This was the final piece of the audit. I turned the deadbolt, the sound unnaturally loud, and opened the door. She flinched at the sound, her eyes widening. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe I had actually opened the door. In her right hand, she was clutching a small, black object, a USB flash drive. "Claire," she whispered, her voice a dry, rasping thing I barely recognized. I didn't invite her in. I simply stood in the doorway, a human barrier. "What do you want?" "Jenna." She took a shaky breath and held out the flash drive. Her hand was trembling so much that the drive seemed to vibrate. I wanted you to have this," she stammered. "It's another copy of the video. The one from my phone. I backed it up before everything." I stared at the drive, then back at her face. My mind was racing, running through the possibilities. Was this a trick? A Trojan horse with a virus? An attempt at some new, desperate form of manipulation? As if reading my thoughts, she shook her head quickly. "It's not for him. It's for you," she said, her voice cracking. I kept thinking, what if he tries something? What if he tries to come back, to hurt you again, I thought. You should have another one, a copy no one knows about, just in case. I looked into her eyes, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw something that wasn't a reflection of her own needs. The familiar glint of entitlement, of casual cruelty, of self-interest, it was gone. In its place was a raw, hollowed-out landscape of what looked like genuine remorse. It wasn't a performance. It was too ugly, too broken to be an act. This was the face of a person who had been forced to look at the wreckage of her own choices and had finally, truly, understood her role in its creation. Her words continued to spill out, a desperate, disorganized confession. I hated him, Claire. I really did. I hated the way he talked to Mom, the way he controlled everything, but he had everything, the money, the power, and I was so scared of losing it, so I went along with it. I laughed at his jokes. I smiled when he wanted me to smile. I was so afraid of being on the outside, of having nothing. I thought that if I just played the game, I'd be safe. She finally met my gaze. Her own eyes swimming with tears she seemed too exhausted to shed. I was a coward. The confession hung in the air, a raw and pitiable thing. The old Claire would have felt a surge of pity, an instinct to comfort, to say, "It's okay." But the auditor doesn't comfort. The auditor simply records the facts. I looked at my sister, at the ruin she had become, and I delivered my final, impartial assessment. You were afraid of losing everything. Jenna, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of an undeniable truth. But you already lost it. You lost it all in the second you laughed while I was being hit. There was no anger in my voice, no triumph. It was a simple statement of cause and effect, an entry in a ledger that had now been balanced. It was not a punishment. It was a fact. A single tear finally escaped her eye and traced a path through the pale dust of her skin. She didn't wipe it away. She simply nodded, a slow, jerky motion of acceptance. The fight had gone out of her completely. She had come here for absolution, and I had given her an audit. It was all I had left to give. She gently placed the USB drive on the small table by my doorway. She didn't try to say anything else. She turned and walked away down the long, quiet hallway without looking back. I watched until she disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the door, the click of the lock sealing the final chapter of our lives together. I picked up the flash drive. It felt weightless in my hand, a small piece of plastic that held the immense gravity of my past. I walked into my living room and plugged it into my laptop. A single file appeared, the same ugly string of numbers and letters my phone had originally assigned it. I clicked play. The video was the same, a chaotic, sickening replay of the worst moment of my life. I watched it without flinching, a detached observer reviewing archived footage. My eyes were fixed on the timer in the corner of the screen. I watched the final few seconds, the part I had never focused on before. The video ends after my body has hit the credenza. The screen is a blur of motion. Then it steadies, pointing at the floorboards. The only sound is my own breathing, a series of sharp, ragged, desperate gasps. The sound of a person trying to pull the world back into their lungs after it has been knocked out of them. It is the most vulnerable sound I have ever heard. And then, over the sound of my own trauma, another voice speaks. It is not human. It is the calm, synthetic, female voice of my phone's AI assistant, confirming the completion of its task. Auto-saved to cloud. The video ended. The screen went black. A small, dry smile touched my lips. The machine had no concept of justice. It had no understanding of pain or betrayal. It had simply executed a command, followed its programming, and backed up a file. Technology is a neutral force, a tool without a soul. But in its cold, impartial, automated action, it had delivered a justice more perfect and complete than any human emotion ever could. Justice, I realized, isn't a feeling, it's a process, and it never, ever gets deleted. The USB drive Jenna had given me felt like a closing statement, the final piece of evidence in a long and exhaustive trial. The corporate case was closed. The financial empire was a smoking ruin. But the original crime, the act of violence itself, had not yet been formally entered into the official record of society. The corporate audit was complete. Now, it was time for the civic one. That night, I took a taxi to a part of the city I had never visited. A neighborhood of imposing gray buildings that housed the alphabet soup of government agencies. My destination was a field office for a federal task force that handled white-collar crime and public integrity cases, the kind of place that would already have a burgeoning file on a man like Thomas Nolan. The office was a study in bureaucratic indifference. The air smelled of stale coffee and old paper. The fluorescent lights hummed with a monotonous, clinical buzz, casting a flat, shadowless light on the scuffed linoleum floors. It was a place where human dramas were flattened into case numbers and filed away in manila folders. It was perfect. I was led to a small, windowless interview room where a man in a rumpled suit introduced himself as Agent Miller. He looked tired, a man who ran on caffeine and a cynical sense of duty. He had the weary eyes of someone who had seen every possible permutation of human greed and corruption. He opened a thin folder that had Thomas's name on it. "You're Claire Nolan," he said. It wasn't a question. "We've been following the Nolan partners' collapse. Assumed we'd be hearing from someone on the inside eventually." He gestured to the USB drive I'd placed on the metal table between us. "You said on the phone you have supplemental evidence." "I do," I replied, my voice steady. The original video that initiated the corporate inquiry was discovered by our internal compliance system. This is a second, corroborating copy, from a different source, and a second audio recording, which contains what could be construed as an attempt to coerce a witness. I explained the origins of the new evidence in the driest, most procedural terms I could manage. Omitting the emotional drama of Jenna's visit, I referred to her only as a second party with direct knowledge of the event. I was not here to tell a story. I was here to submit data. Miller listened without interruption, his expression unchanging. When I was finished, he took the USB drive, handling it with a pair of tweezers and placing it into a sealed evidence bag. He made a few notes on a form, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. "This is very helpful, Ms. Nolan," he said, finally looking up at me. "Evidence like this, especially the second recording, strengthens the case for witness tampering and obstruction, on top of any potential assault charges." He paused, his gaze analytical. "Informants in cases like this, particularly when they lead to the prosecution of a high-profile target, are often eligible for a reward. There are also protections we can offer, or you can choose to remain an anonymous source, a footnote in the file." He leaned back in his chair. "So, which is it? Do you want the reward, or do you want to be anonymous?" This was the final test. A reward would be compensation for my pain, a public acknowledgement of my role. Anonymity was something else. It was an erasure of the self in favor of the process. It was the ultimate statement of my new philosophy. "Anonymous," I said, my voice clear and firm. "I don't want or need anything. I only have one request." "And what's that?" he asked, a flicker of curiosity in his tired eyes. "The file names? I want them entered into the record exactly as they are. Keep the original file names." Miller picked up the evidence bag and squinted at the small label I had affixed to the USB drive. He read the titles aloud, his voice flat. "Domestic Audit, MP4, and Part 2, M4A. He looked at me, a question in his expression. I gave him a small, tight smile. "Let the data speak for itself," I said. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. He understood. I was not a woman seeking revenge. I was an auditor closing a case. My business there was finished. I was escorted out of the sterile and quiet building and back into the living, breathing city. A light rain had begun to fall, a fine, cleansing mist that beaded on the shoulders of my coat. The night was alive with the glow of neon signs, their reds, blues, and greens bleeding across the wet asphalt in shimmering, distorted reflections. It was beautiful, in a cold, electric way. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, letting the cool, damp air wash over me. The last and final piece of evidence was now where it belonged, logged and sealed in the impartial machinery of the law. The process was complete. I reached into my pocket for my phone. I had, out of pure, ingrained habit, made a secure copy of the USB's contents and had it automatically upload to my own private, encrypted cloud storage while in the taxi. The screen illuminated as I pulled it out. A simple, declarative statement was displayed in the center. Backup completed. Of course it was. The system was always working, always preserving, always creating redundant copies of the truth. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned my face up to the rain. A feeling of profound, quiet finality settling over me. Thomas had built an empire on his ability to control people, to shape narratives, to silence dissent with money and fear. He thought his power was absolute. He thought he had silenced me, but he had made a fatal error. He had forgotten that he was not fighting a person. He was fighting a process, and the cloud remembers everything. Thank you so much for joining me for this story. I'm so grateful to have you here listening. I would love to connect with all of you. So please, drop a comment down below and let me know where in the world you're listening from today. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really want to help support what I do, please press that hype button. It tells the platform that you enjoyed this, and it helps ensure that this story can be heard by even more people. Thanks again for everything, and I'll see you in the next one. See.